Hello and welcome. We're delighted to have you join us. My name is Catherine Baisden, and I am the project manager for the Partnership for Expanding Education Research in STEM, or PEERS, Data Hub at the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, ICPSR. The PEERS Data Hub is funded by the National Science Foundation and is a collaborative initiative with the American Education Research Association, AERA, and ICPSR. The PEERS Data Hub features ways to explore and discover data sets for secondary research and analysis, avenues for connecting with colleagues and like-minded researchers, and resources for data and research management. If you would like to know more and also register for upcoming webinars for free, such as this one, please visit the PEERS Data Hub website at www.peersdatahub.net. This website will introduce you to data archives that contain high-quality, well-documented data related to STEM education. Before we hear from our four presenters, I just want to remind you that one of the PEERS features is a data discovery page, where you can find links to the resources discussed today, as well as many more. Today, we are hearing from four research scholars who work in various areas of educational research. Let me introduce Erin Foley. Erin Foley is the Executive Director of the Educational Opportunity Project at Stanford University. Erin has contributed to the methodological development and implementation of the Stanford Education Data Archive, from the very first version to the most recent releases showcasing post-pandemic data. For this work, Erin was a co-recipient of the AERA Division D Significant Contribution Award and the NCME Annual Award. She has also used the SADA data in research to explore how social and school contexts affects gender, racial/ethnic, and socioeconomic inequalities and students' access to educational opportunities and subsequent achievement. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and other national media outlets. Prior to her current role, she was an assistant professor at St. John's University and research scientist at NWEA. Our next presenter, Sebastian Kocher, is an associate director of the Qualitative Data Repository and research assistant professor of political science at Syracuse University. He works and researches on management and curation of qualitative data, research transparency, and the interaction of technology and scholarship. Sebastian's work has been published widely in social and information science, and he speaks and teaches frequently on issues related to qualitative research and data sharing. Our third panelist, Sandra Tong, is an assistant research scientist at the Institute for Social Research, where she splits her time working with the Youth Policy Lab and ICPSR. She is the co-investigator of the Child and Family Data Archive and directs CF Data's dissemination activities. Sandra earned her PhD in Applied Developmental and Educational Psychology from Boston College, where she was a diversity fellow and completed an NICHD postdoctoral fellowship in developmental psychology at the University of Michigan. Finally, let me introduce Allison Flaster, program director of the PEERS project. Allison Flaster is an assistant research scientist at ICPSR. She directs the ICPSR Consortium Archive on Education Data and the ICPSR AERA Education Data Sharing Initiative. Her research focuses on college access and success for marginalized students. Allison has a PhD in higher education from the University of Michigan and is a faculty affiliate of the Michigan Institute for Data Science, MIDAS. I would like to say thank you in advance to all our speakers and your contributions as attendees. Dr. Faley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm excited to be able to chat with you all today about the Stanford Education Data Archive. I want to take 1 second to acknowledge that this work was supported by the lovely group of funders that you can see on this slide. So thanks to them, we have this resource available. And if you would like to already start exploring the data as I start to talk, please feel free to navigate over to our website at opportunity.org. All right, next slide, please. So the Stanford Education Data Archive has 2 primary databases inside of it. The first is the one that I'm going to talk about here, which is our 2009 to 2019 educational opportunity data. The most recent version of this data is CETA 5.0. That's something to keep in mind. You'll hear that term come up again later. And if you are on our website or going to navigate there, you might see some of the images that I'm showing at the top of the screen here. So on the right-hand side, you're seeing actually our interactive data explorer, which is one way to use our data. And I'll talk in a little bit about other ways to use the data as well. But CETA 5.0 is going to contain nationally comparable data on average achievement, learning, and trends in achievement across the United States. So we're drawing on 11 years of underlying data and are able to produce these estimates for over 70,000 schools, 13,000 school districts, 3,000 counties, and other geographic units. We provide the estimates by subgroup, and these include racial, ethnic, economic, and gender subgroups for multiple subjects, math and reading language arts, and for multiple grades, 3 through 8. And of course, the years that I listed before. We've also created data to serve as a complement to this, building from data sources from the Common Core of Data, the ACS, and others, where we provide demographic and socioeconomic data that is already matched to the achievement estimates. So it can help you kind of get a jump start on starting to look at some important patterns and trends in educational opportunity across the United States. We go to the next slide, please. Our second data product that we have is a much more recent data product focusing on the last few years. So here, this product was created out of a need to understand achievement kind of post-COVID. So there was very little information without the large-scale testing programs operating during that COVID period. So what we wanted to do was provide quick information in 2022 and 2023 around what had happened relative to kind of national achievement in 2019, in 2022, and 2023. Our most recent release of this data is called CETA 2023. And here you're going to have nationally comparable data on average achievement and changes in achievement during that pre to post-COVID time period. Now, one thing you'll notice almost immediately is we have a lot less data in this database. So the map itself is much sparser. That is reflecting the fact that rather than use some of the federal data sources that we had relied on to build the CETA 5.0 database, we needed to now publicly scrape data from state websites. And so that meant that there was a lot less data available for our use, and because of things like privacy suppression. So we're only going to be reporting data for about 7,000 school districts in this particular case. And we're only going to have the estimates available by subject and year, not disaggregated by grade. And we'll have subgroups where they were available in the underlying data from states themselves. If you interact with our Explorer, you'll see 3 years of data on there, just 2019, 2022, and 2023. But if you download the data files, you'll see we actually give you data back to 2016 in a comparable format. So there's a little bit more of a baseline period in that pre-COVID timeframe. Similar to the data that I spoke about before, we've also curated some covariate data to go with it from the Common Core of Data. We can go to the next slide, please. So as I foreshadowed, you can go to our website and play around with the data on the interactive explorers that you saw featured on the last couple of slides. But you can also download the data files. And there's a lot more in the downloads than there is that you can actually interact with during the interactive explorer time. So to access our data, what you have to do is sign our data use agreement. This data use agreement has 2 key components. One is that you're not going to use the data for any commercial advantage or for-profit activities. And the second is that you are going to cite us when you use the data. So hopefully your results end up in a publication, and then you'd be able to cite the source of your data as the Stanford Education Data Archive. To sign this agreement, all you have to do is enter your email address at the bottom of the page, and you will be automatically redirected to our download page. Next slide, please. Our download page, admittedly, is a little overwhelming. There's lots and lots that's there. So I'm going to try to break this down a little bit. So at the top here, you can see there's lots of different versions listed at the top of the slide. You'll see that same layout on the download page. We are always going to recommend that if you are new users of our data, you go to the most recent version. These versions reflect the most current data and our most current methodology for creating the achievement estimates and the covariate estimates that are on the website. So these reflect the best data that we have available for you to use. However, if you are doing a replication study of some sort and need to use an earlier version, those are also all linked on our website. So feel free to use an earlier version for that purpose, but I will encourage you to use our most recent versions. So I've highlighted both of those here in the versions, both CETA 5.0, the opportunity data, and CETA 2023, the recovery data. This page is currently selected in on CETA 5.0. And you know that because if you look at the version notes box, you can see the 5.0 right in there. So it gives you a small snapshot of what is in the data. And then the real magic happens as you scroll down on this page. So if we go to the next slide, this is one example of the overwhelming tables you might encounter on our data download page, showing you all of the possible files that you can download. Here I've focused on the achievement data downloads, but you'll also see tables with technical documentation and codebooks, covariate data, and auxiliary files, things like crosswalks and shape files that we've used in the construction of our data. So just to give you a little context on this particular file, I'm going to walk you through what the first file means here. So the name helps tell it all, and then the information in the row of the table will help explain what's in there. So we have the CETA School Pool CS 5.0 file. So CETA, that prefix, is going to talk about the opportunity data. School is going to tell you the geographic unit that the file is for. So this we have school level data. The pool refers to the disaggregation. This data is not disaggregated by any years, grades, or subjects, which means that you're getting a single row of data per school. And the CS refers to the scale in which we're reporting the data. CS is the cohort standardized scale. And I know I'm throwing out some terminology here, so this is something that I will give you some resources in just a second for understanding more about this. That's going to be our standard deviation scale, the one that we recommend for research. And that's what you find in the first file. And similarly, you can look at the other ones. We have little keys below the table that define all of these different terms for you. And one thing to note, we provide the files both in a Stata and a CSV version, so you should be able to access them regardless of what statistical software you're using. Go to the next slide, please. This might be particularly useful for those who are planning or thinking about using the CETA data. In addition to the data itself, we also provide research papers on our website. These include both the technical and methodological papers that we use that describe the methods that we use to construct the data and all the validation exercises that we've undergone to ensure high quality estimates are produced by our process, as well as applied research papers, some written by us, some written by others. So it can give you a idea of how we've used the data in research and how others have merged it with outside data sources to answer really interesting questions. So I highly encourage you to check out our research page in addition to our data download page. Next slide, please. And I am going to put in another peers endorsement here. So years ago, we did a training in partnership with AERA and ICPSR peers. And this presentation is freely available on YouTube. It talks about our data construction, as well as provides information about how you might think about using the data to answer research questions you're interested in. So if you are thinking about using the CETA data, I highly recommend watching this tutorial as well. And once you dig into the data, if you have questions, you can reach out to our team directly through cetasupport@stanford.edu. Next slide, please. So I'm going to close on telling you something that's actually not about the Stanford Education Data Archive, but earlier this month, the Educational Opportunity Project at Stanford, in partnership with USC, launched a new database on our website, and this is called the Segregation Explorer. So this just came out on May 6th, so it is brand new data, hot off the presses. It is data on school composition and racial and economic segregation across the United States. So here we have multiple measures of segregation for multiple geographic units. If you're interested in understanding how segregation limits educational opportunity, this might be a great data set to dive into. Again, very similar to CETA, you can download the data on the website. You could also get support directly from our team at the email shown on this slide. With that, I will pass it over to Sebastian.
All right, for entirely different type of project. So my name is Sebastian Kircher. I'm from the Qualitative Data Repository. Next slide, please. And QDR is a data repository for primarily qualitative and some multi-method data. We're originally kind of from political science. That's where our origins, that's where our first funding came from. But we've now branched out across the social sciences and beyond. And one of the areas where we're growing most rapidly is in education data, which is why the colleagues at ICPSR asked us to join. And of course, qualitative research has a long and storied presence within education research. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of some of the materials that we have a large collection of videos that are kind of teaching rubric videos, so different qualities of teaching assessed. We have several projects that have semi-structured interviews. You see an example here at the bottom left. This is interviews with Australian high school athletes. We have a number of projects that have coded qualitative data. In some cases, we just have excerpts from the codes. In some cases, we have the whole transcripts coded. That's the bottom right. And then we have kind of broader ranges. So what you see at the top there, that's not education, but I thought it'd be useful for illustration. That's this schematic map that was designed as part of a focus group study on environmental science in Africa. Thematically, a lot of the qualitative data that we have on education is around kind of minoritized groups. So we have something about LGBT groups and their perceptions. We have another study that's about music educators and I think their relationship to race. So those sorts of things, but it's also, as I said, quickly growing, and so check back in regularly if you're looking for data. And on that topic, next slide, please. Our data archive is linked on the screen, and you can browse that in a number of ways. Notably, our subject terms don't have education listed separately, so you have to find a different way to get at education. You can look for our keywords, and education is listed there. That's not going to be exhaustive because, ironically, not all education process projects list themselves as education. If you're looking for specific regional data, you can browse by geography. We developed a relatively simple ontology for describing the type of data that's in a project. So you can look, if you're just really interested in interview transcripts or maybe focus group transcripts, you can filter just by those. And these are kind of facets that are displayed on the left as you would see them for many data repositories. Next screen, please. You can also just search for data. There is a general purpose search bar at the top of every page. And then there is an advanced search, of which I'm showing you an excerpt at the bottom right. Most notably, for quantitative data in our multi-method studies, we automatically extract variable names and labels, so you can search for individual variables and names. And for perhaps more relevantly, for qualitative data, all of the files are full text index that we host, so you can search for individual keywords or phrases in the full text of all transcripts included. That includes only the transcripts that you currently have access to. So importantly, our data is typically only accessible for registered users. Registration is free, but you want to be logged in when you search, in particular when you search full text, because only then will the full text search results that you get actually include all the files that you can easily have access to. It would still not give you restricted use files. Those obviously we can't present as the output of full text research. Next slide, please. One more. We also try to make sure that you can't find QDR data if you don't go to QDR, and I thought this would be useful for you to have in mind more generally as we're talking about finding data. So here are what I think are probably two of the most useful broad data search engines that currently exist, both with some problems that I'll talk about. On the left, you see Google's dataset search. Most QDR datasets are indexed in there, and brief description, they draw on our metadata. So the metadata is broadly analogous to what you would see on our site, though obviously less rich because they don't get anything. They don't get everything. One of the struggles that most data archives that I talk to have with Google is that it's kind of a black box. So they index most of our data sets, but not all of them. And we can try to prod them automatically, but there's only so much we can do. And so there's some data sets that just don't appear there. And my understanding is that many other data archives have the same experience. So be aware of that as you use Google Dataset Search. The other example is DataCite. DataCite is the organization that provides DOIs, so the stable links, the 10 dot whatever you see on most, but again, not all datasets. And DataCite has a really useful search site that's called DataCite Commons, where you can search not just for works, but also for individual people and their works, for individual repository and works that are at that individual repository, et cetera, et cetera. And the limitations there are, the works that are indexed are only works that have DOI. So if you think back to the SEDA data at Stanford, for example, at least in the version housed at Stanford's, those don't. And so they wouldn't show up here, although they're obviously incredibly important education data sets. So that's something to be aware of. It's also the case that the site isn't always great in producing the most relevant results. So you see it's about 20,000 works listed for the qualitative data repository. That's because we assign a DOI to every single file that we host on QDR. We only have around 200 data sets. So typically you would prefer to only see presumably those 200 data sets, but that's not the level of granularity the DataCite Commons search works at. So again, another thing to be aware of as a limitation as you kind of try to find data across repositories. I know ICPSR is working on this, and as are many other organizations, kind of providing a better data set search. It's kind of the holy grail in the data repository community. I hope in another 2 years or so we'll have better news for you all there. But that's kind of what we commonly have, and you'll be able to find a lot of the data that we talk about today in one of those search engines, including QDR data, which is why I'm showing you those today. Next slide, please. You'll notice, returning to QDR, that most of our data are have one of two licenses. We have a standard license that essentially allows you to immediately download data and use it for educational and research anywhere in the world. There's no geographic limitation. No commercial use, just like for the Stanford data. And that's about 80% of our data holdings. And then we have some data holdings that are more sensitive in nature that require applications for access. So controlled access data, and you'll see that little lock item. You can also filter by access conditions in the facets that I showed you in the beginning. You'll need to meet conditions of access, which vary by dataset, but are described in the dataset terms. So you can see, would I qualify there? Then you click a button to apply, and we can, in most cases, process that very quickly and give people access to data in a week or less. So if you want data, don't let the controlled access be a deterrent from requesting and wanting to use that. And notably, all QDR data are accessible free of charge. So even if they are controlled, you need to pass the conditions, but you don't ever need to pay for access to our data. Do I have another slide? Great. I'm available for all sorts of questions, and we have all sorts of social media presence. So please be in touch and follow us. And we have Sandra next.
Thank you, Sebastian. Before I begin, I just wanted to give a very quick shout out and thank you to the Peers Data Hub for inviting the Child and Family Data Archive to be part of this webinar and to be showcased along with these other wonderful archives like CEDA and QDR. So again, my name is Sandra Tang, and I'm a developmental and educational psychologist, and I'm a co-investigator of CF Data, which is an early care and education data archive. Next slide, please. CF Data is a project that is funded by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, OPRE, which is in the U.S. government's Administration for Children and Families. And CF Data is housed at ICPSR at the University of Michigan. Next slide. So this archive was launched in 2019, so just about 5 years ago, and our mission is to preserve and disseminate data on topics that are related to young children, their families and communities, and the programs that serve them. We provide access to nearly 400 data sets and their accompanying documentation. So this includes things like user guides and code books, which are really great for researchers to use and understand the data for analysis. Importantly, because this work is funded by OPRE, the data are available to researchers for analysis free of charge. Next slide. So the type of data we have in this archive is really wide-ranging. We have both quantitative and qualitative data. We have data on federal and state-funded programs like Head Start and Early Head Start, the Child Care and Development Fund Block Grant, and the Maternal Infant and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. We also have administrative data and community-based surveys that are focused on parent and child development. And we also have observational studies in classrooms and home visits. So there's really a wealth of data in this archive. And if you're interested in research questions that are related to the early learning environment and how it might relate to students' learning and later development, this archive is a really great place to find data that can help you answer those types of research questions. Next slide, please. So hopefully I've piqued your interest and now you're wondering, okay, where do I find this really great archive with all this great data? So the best way to find us is to go to the website at the URL at the bottom of the screen, so childandfamilydataarchive.org. And it's through this website that you'll be able to explore our data, you'll be able to see how others have used our data, and you'll also learn about the different types of data training opportunities that we provide. Next slide. Okay, so once you're at the CF Data website, what you'll want to do is click on the first tab called Getting Started. If you're a new user in particular, this is a really great place to get oriented to the website and the different resources we have available. So this page just provides you some quick links to some of our featured resources that guide you in exploring our data collection and also finding data to meet your research needs. Next slide. So there are two main ways to search for data on our website. One is through this main homepage. So as you can see, there's that large search bar that's circled in red. You can type in the specific study name if you know it, or you can put in your search term and then you just click enter. Next slide. The second way to search for data is to go under that second tab called circled data, and you click on the find data, which will take you to this page. So similar to the home page, if you know what you're looking for, you can just enter your search term or the study name in this search bar under search for data. But sometimes, as you know, we don't really know what we're looking for. And if that's the case, you can browse the data by looking at some of the common search terms or keywords that are found in our data sets. So here's just a very small snapshot of some of the search terms, but we have many more on our page. And so I encourage you to come visit and explore. Next slide. So you can also find data for your research by searching for specific variables. And you can do this by the Variables tab, which allows you to search and compare variables across all the studies in CF data. And currently there's over 600,000 variables. So what you'd want to do here is enter the words or phrases that are related to your measures of interest in that search box. And then the search results will return a list of variables related to your search term. And this information includes the variable name, the label, the question text if it's available, the variable type, and where that variable comes from. Next slide. And then similar to the Variables tab, you can also search for data through the Data Related Publications tab, which allows you to search our database with over 10,000 publications. So say, for example, that you are interested in using a certain study or data set to examine a question about executive function. And by searching the Data Related Publications, you can see what has been published on executive function with a specific study and get a sense of how people have analyzed your construct of interest with that data set. You can also search for publications across studies by topic, and the results will let you know which data sets are commonly used to answer questions about a particular topic. And I think this is a really great way to find out about data sets that might not have been on your radar. Next slide. Another way to explore and find relevant data for your research is to check out our infographics under the Resources tab. Next slide. So here's just a partial snapshot of one of our infographics. And as a developmental psychologist, my research questions often focus on particular age groups. And so I'm really partial to this infographic, which helps me see which child ages are covered in different studies. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the study names listed, and then you'll have the bars representing the range of the children's ages that are included in the study. And then the color of the bars indicate the different time methods. So for example, blue indicates longitudinal data, green is cross-sectional data, and yellow is repeat cross-sectional. And so this is helpful in determining whether you can use a certain analytic approach with the data. Next slide. And then similarly, here's another snapshot of an infographic that organizes select data sets by when the data were collected. And it's again using the same color scheme. So I also just wanted to mention that if, for example, you're interested in looking for a study that has multiple respondents, so say you want to know the parents' response, the teacher's response, and the administrator's response, or if you're interested in identifying data sets with certain child assessments, we also have charts on our website that will help you identify those as well. So my point here is just check out those resources under the infographics. They're very helpful. Next slide. And then under the Resources tab, you will find a page that has all of our video resources. So CF Data, we often host data webinars and data trainings on the data sets that we have in our archive. And on this page here, you will find recordings of those webinars and the accompanying slides. So on this video resources page, you'll also be able to find general videos about the CF Data archive and how to search for studies on our website. Right here, the videos are shown chronologically, but you can also filter the videos by study if you have a particular one in mind. Next slide. And then finally, I just wanted to give a push about our CF Data seasonal newsletter that we send out to our listserv. And in this newsletter, we highlight new data that has been released, recent user publications, and any upcoming data training webinars that we might host. And each newsletter has a theme where we spotlight data related to that theme. So for example, in the past, we've had one on dual language learners. We've had one on teacher characteristics. We've had one on data related to COVID. And then also the last one we had was on grants offered by OPRE for secondary analysis of data. So this newsletter is just a great way to keep up to date on what's going on with the CF Data archive. Next slide. So if you're interested and you want to sign up for the newsletter and hear about all the great things that are going on in CF Data, I encourage you to go to the Contact Us tab and add your contact information, and we will keep you updated on everything that's going on. Next slide. So this is just a very brief overview of CF data, but to learn more about the archive, I really encourage you to visit us at our website and check it out yourself. And please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks so much for your attention, and I'll pass it along to Allison.
All right, thanks, Sandra. So hi, everyone. I'm Allison Flaster. I'm an assistant research scientist at ICPSR. I'm also getting over a cold, so I just want to apologize for my voice. If it goes in and out through my presentation, it's not your audio, it's me. So I'm going to be talking today about how to find education-related data in ICPSR's consortium archive. So I'm going to be giving some kind of tips and tricks along the way about how you can search most effectively and find the really good education data in our holdings. Along the lines of what Sebastian was saying about search, when you have a lot of resources in your archive, it can be a little, the search can be a little tricky to kind of find exactly what you're looking for. So I'm really hoping today to give you some tools that will let you kind of get right into the stuff that you want to find. Right, next slide. Okay, so first, what is ICPSR? We're an organization that also hosts the Peers Data Hub along with AERA, and it stands for the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. We are the largest social science data archive in the world with over 250,000 holdings. So ICPSR contains holdings that are supported by two main groups. One of which are sponsors of specialized collections, and the other being the ICPSR Consortium. So Sandra just presented about one of those sponsored collections, in this case, the Child and Family Data Archive. And I'm going to be talking about the archive at ICPSR that's supported by the over 800 institutions that make up the ICPSR Consortium. Next slide. So these consortium members are colleges, universities, and other types of research organizations, and they're all around the world. They pay a membership fee to join ICPSR, and this provides their students, staff, and faculty with free access to data that is curated and disseminated using these membership funds. Next slide, please. If you're curious whether the institution you work or study at is an ICPSR consortium member, you can check here at this page on the ICPSR website. Generally, most large research oriented institutions are members of ICPSR, but so are many other types of institutions. So who does ICPSR serve? We say pretty much anyone who uses social science data, which of course includes education researchers. So even if you work or study at an institution that is not an ICPSR member, you can still access the data held in the ICPSR Consortium archive. There just might be a fee to do so, which I can talk a little bit more about later. But in many cases, there is no fee regardless of whether you're at a member institution or not. All right, so today I'm going to show you how to find education data in the consortium archives. And one thing to know about searching for data at ICPSR is that if you search the website, it will bring back results from all across the ICPSR platforms. So this includes both the specialized collections as well as ICPSR has a self-publishing platform called Open ICPSR, and the search will bring those results back too. So I'm going to show you how to filter all of these results efficiently using some of our search terms, as well as a little hack I'm going to show you. The first thing you'll do is you'll start at the main ICPSR page listed there and enter your search term. So today I'm going to kind of demo an example of a search. And I'm going to start with a broad search for education data in this demo. So I'm just going to enter education. Then I'm going to sort the results to look for the most recent or highly cited or the most relevant entries. And then I'm going to show you the special trick to exclude replication data sets from Open ICPSR and any other data sets that are kind of minimally related to education. There are lots of studies in our holdings that, might be described as education-related studies, in reality are not that closely tied to education. And it might be because they include a variable, related to education, such as respondents' years of education or parents' education level or something like that. And that oftentimes can be enough to kind of pull those studies into a search for education. So yeah, I'm going to show you some ways to kind of minimize those in your results. Okay, so next slide. Here's an example of that search. So you can see a screenshot after I searched for the term education on the ICPSR website. You can see that after I searched, I got over 10,000 studies in return, which is a lot. You know, that definitely suggests I could probably narrow my search term down to something more specific than just education, like STEM education, for instance. I also sorted the results so that you can see the most recently released or updated studies are at the top of the returned list. And that was in the hopes of seeing the newest data first. If that's what you're looking for, then that's what you'll want to sort by. And if you look at the results, those first 4 results, you'll see that the first 2 studies don't seem to have too much to do with education, at least as judging by their titles. So again, maybe they contain like education-related variables, such as number of years of schooling, or maybe education about some health topics, but they aren't, the studies themselves are not focused on education. And then the next 2 studies you'll see are about education, but they are just replication data or code for journal articles. And I know this due to their title, because they say code in the title, and because they've been deposited in Open ICPSR, which is that self-publishing data platform that's used very often for replication data and journal article publishing, which is wonderful for the transparency and reproducibility of our research. But it's not necessarily great data for secondary data analysis, if that's what you're looking for. Next slide, please. So one thing I would recommend to do is to add to your searches this little trick right here, do open or minus and then open ICPSR, all one word. So if you add that to your search, as I've done here, as you can see circled in red, this removes the replication studies and other self-published data. So that's one step I would recommend. Next slide. And there's also another option that removes the Open ICPSR replication studies and removes secondary data that is minimally related to education. Now, this is kind of a hack because it uses search terms that aren't really meant to be used by people outside of ICPSR. It's kind of an internal little system. And so I just want to offer a caveat that while these search terms are publicly available now on our website, in our search function, they might not always be in the future. If the search page gets redesigned, those might not always be publicly available. But I'm going to share them now because I think they're useful for getting to the really good education data in the consortium archive really quickly. So this is what I recommend doing. You can go to this ClassIFs drop-down menu, which is on the left side of your screen as circled here in red. Next slide. So you're going to go to that menu, and then you're going to click View All. And then it's going to provide you a whole list of different classification codes that ICPSR uses internally to classify data. And if you scroll way down through this alphabetized list, you'll eventually get to the code ICPSR.V. And if you click on it, this code is given to basically any study in the ICPSR consortium archive that is primarily about education. So if you click on this, it will pull up all of those studies. Next slide, please. And in addition to that code, there are several more classification codes related to education at different levels of granularity. So post-secondary education, primary and secondary in the US, outside of the US, as well as some other related terms that I've listed here to help you narrow down your search and find that high quality data that you're looking for. But for the rest of the demonstration, I'm just going to show you results using the ICPSR.V. Next slide. Okay, so after I applied that code, I got a list of studies that are definitely related to education. They're high quality, lots of great documentation. They're intended for reuse in research. So this is all great data for you to use in your own studies. Scrolling through the list, this one happened to catch my eye. It's a randomized controlled trial about fractions. So I thought, I'll check into that one a little bit more. Next slide, please. And so I click on it and it gives me much more information about the study, including its documentation, citations of other projects that have used the data, which in this case, it looks like it had 4 different publications have used this data. You'll also see the access level of the data. So that includes whether it's available for free to anyone or only to consortium members, and whether the data is public or restricted access. And so I've circled that information here in red. And information like that will be available for each study. Next slide, please. So before I end, I want to share a few education data highlights from the ICPSR Consortium Archive on Education. So first on the left, if you're a higher education scholar, you know that data on faculty is hard to come by since the US Department of Education stopped fielding the national study of post-secondary faculty back in 2004. And so it feels like Ithaca S&R, with their faculty survey, they've really kind of stepped up to fill this gap. So they survey faculty. It's a random sample of US faculty across various disciplines, including the STEM disciplines. Ask them about their attitudes and practices relating to research, teaching, service, all those activities. So if you're looking for instance, data on faculty, this is a great resource. Second on the right, I wanted to highlight this study as well. And that if you're a STEM education researcher, then you probably know the importance of developing scientific literacy among individuals. And that's what this study really is about. The longitudinal study of American youth has data from 2 different cohorts of 7th graders from decades apart, which allows for cross-cohort comparisons of scientific literacy before and after kind of the birth of the digital era, which is really interesting. So one of the cohorts was, I think, in the 90s, and the other is more recent, I believe in 2015. They also have a longitudinal aspect to this study. So there's a related study that you can look at as well that contains follow-up surveys of the 7th graders when they reach midlife for that earlier cohort. So lots of different interesting facets to that study. Of course, these are just 2 of many really interesting education studies available. So I would encourage you to search the archive for yourself to see if there's data relevant to your own interests. Next slide, please. All right, and please, reach out to ICPSR if you have questions while searching. There is the ICPSR website, and our user support desk can be reached at that email address, icpsr-help@umich.edu. Pose any question, and our user support team will direct that question to the relevant staff, whether that's myself, I'm certainly always happy to help, or Sandra, or whoever at ICPSR. So that kind of concludes my brief tour of the ICPSR Consortium Archive related to education. And I think now we have some time to answer questions from the audience. So I will hand things over to Karani.
Thanks, Allison. We have one question so far. Please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A. The question is, do you have plans to integrate GPT with its data analytic capabilities to help people interface with the archive? This question came around 2:32, so perhaps it was for one of the earlier presenters, but I don't know if any of the data archive staff know of any of these developments.
Really good question. I think everyone's still trying to figure out what to do with ChatGPT and large language models in general, and kind of how to integrate that into the research process, most definitely. And there's certainly a lot of discussion going on with how to integrate that, especially with restricted data, which is a really challenging thing, because obviously that requires sharing data with the model, which generally is not a practice that is allowable when you're working with restricted data, which is the sharing of data. So I don't know, I think people are still really thinking through how this works. I will say that I do know that ICPSR is part of its research data ecosystem project that they're developing now, kind of re-envisioning the research data ecosystem of the 21st century, and how researchers analyze data. they have been developing a tool that helps researchers develop metadata for their studies using a large language model. And that's now being piloted at the Harvard Dataverse if folks want to go give that a try. So that's one instance where I know of a, ChatGPT or something like it being used to kind of help with the data reuse and archiving process. But that's about all that I'm aware of. Does anybody have any other developments, knowledge of developments going on there?
Yeah, maybe to add to that a little bit. So the reason data archives are quite concerned about LLMs is that they're not very transparent in what they do with data. So if you take ChatGPT, so OpenAI, right? If you use the free version, right, you use what's available on the web, it's pretty clear that the data is going to be built into the next iteration of their model, which would, I think, violate the policies of all data archives present here. So that's a pretty clear no. If you use their non-free versions, there are options. So the API or the paid version, there are options to include queries. So that might work, but there's still, we don't know what they do with the data. We don't know how much to rely, whether we trust their assurances, because parts of the tech industry have a history of running ramshot over promises and regulations, certainly when it comes to privacy. So while we're certainly all thinking about this, we're all aware and looking at the possibilities, we're also worried about the responsibility, right? We're all in the end social science-ish archives, so we all deal with data from human participants. So we have a responsibility to be very careful and responsible with that. All that said, there are, of course, open source models that you can run locally. And those are, for obvious reasons, privacy preserving, because you run them locally on your machine, right? That's your Llama 3.0, etc. And you're, at least for our case, and I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case for the other data archives, certainly welcome to take advantage of those. And they aren't that much harder to use, although they're not quite as capable at this point, but more flexible.
Thanks, Sebastian. We had someone as well ask about quantitative data, where they could find quantitative data on the arts. And I will post this in the chat. We have an archive at ICPSR known as NADAC, which is probably a great place to start.
That's just what I was going to recommend. Thanks, Karani.
Let's see, we have a few more. Someone asks, is there data on STEM or science education? That could probably be for, I know ICPSR certainly has any, but if any of the archives want to answer this.
Yes, the ICPSR Consortium archive definitely has some data about STEM education. In fact, that second study I highlighted in my presentation would be a good one to look at. It's very STEM focused in asking students lots of questions about their achievement, their motivation, their interest in math and science. But there are definitely others in there as well. I would use this term STEM education, and you will find a good selection in the consortium archive.
We have another one. This is for Aaron. What are some of the measures for the segregation data? Are they rank-based or continuous or categorical? Can they be combined with CETA data?
That is a great question. So on the Explorer itself, we only show one of the measures that we have, which is the 2-group normalized exposure index. But in the downloadable files, you'll see that there are many different measures of segregation. And so these follow from a lot of the work. So Sean Reardon and Ann Owens were the two leads for developing this data. They've both done a lot of methodological work on segregation, looking at different measures and their relative pros and cons. And so you'll actually see many of those measures referenced in the data itself. So I would say grab the downloadable files and you'll likely find exactly what you need there. And yes, these can be merged with the CETA data.
As Allison was speaking, someone else asked, what about computational thinking? Do we have any response to that?
Studies about that in particular. So nothing immediately comes to mind at the ICPSR Consortium Archive on Education, but you know, definitely use that search term and see what you can find. Another thing to note is the Peers Data Hub. You go to the website, you'll see there is a link to the Peers Help Desk. If at some point you're really stymied and stuck in your search and you just want to talk it through with another person and maybe get some additional kind of thoughts about where you could look for different data, you can always submit a question there as well, and peers will see if they can help you with your search. So that would be another way to go if you're struggling and finding data on the particular STEM education topic of your interest.
I think this is maybe the last question we have. Someone asked about reading and learning assessments in any of these education archives. I imagine that could be a good search term, or learning assessments and education. So we have a question for Dr. Tang. Do the data on faculty have a decent representation of AAPIs?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think if you have a specific data set in mind from the Child and Family Data Archive, where you're interested in the faculty, the OPRE releases data tables of their data. And so that might be a good start with the documentation that's associated with each of the data sets. You could download those and take a look, and they might have the distribution of the backgrounds of teachers.
Thanks, Sandra. And we have a few more coming in. We love these questions. One is about qualitative data. Can we find original transcripts from interviews or focus groups, as well as their coded transformations?
We definitely have some original transcripts, and if you use the search facets, if you look for interview transcripts in the data type of data project facets, you'd find those. We don't have, I believe, from education, complete raw data plus their coded transformation. We have that in a couple of studies, and we're trying to get more people to share coded data. It's surprisingly hard. Most people, it's rare enough to share qualitative raw, by raw, I mean raw de-identified data. And then to also get them to share their coded data is quite rare, but we're hoping to get more of that. Our qualitative data, I'm just seeing the question come up, is typically either in plain text or in PDF format that you can then easily read out with whatever tool.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, so we need to stop here. I want to thank all the presenters for sharing about the great resources in their archives and the audience for joining us today. Have a great day.